Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. In 2017-18, Jupp Heynckes came out of retirement to manage Bayern Munich after Carlo Ancelotti had been dismissed. He led the club to yet another Bundesliga title before heading back into retirement. The man chosen to replace him was former Bayern midfielder Niko Kovac. It's fair to say the response to his tenure has been mixed, so in this video, we'll take an overall look at how Kovac has changed Bayern. Just before we get into that though, if you're new around here, I'd appreciate it if you liked, commented and subscribed. If you want to see more match reviews, player and manager profiles, and so much more. Drop video suggestions below or tweet at Football Made Simple. Now, let's get into it. If you want to keep up with Bayern Munich as well as other Bundesliga clubs, a good place to do so is OneFootball, which is a great free app that can be downloaded through the link in the description. To see the full spectrum of Kovac's spell, we'll look at his spell with Frankfurt and the tactics which made him Bayern's first choice, what Jupp Heynckes' tactics were with Bayern, so that we can get a full appreciation of how Kovac changed things within the team before an overall assessment. Niko Kovac had been a successful player, representing several top Bundesliga clubs before hanging up his boots to become a manager in 2009. He managed the Croatian national team, but it was at Eintracht Frankfurt where he made his biggest impact. When he was appointed in March of 2016, the club was in a relegation dogfight, and he managed to guide them to safety, winning the relegation promotion playoff match to stay up. With time to work with the team and implement his tactics over the summer, he led the team to 11th and 8th the following seasons. In fact, in 2016-17 they got to the DFB Pokal final before losing to Dortmund, and then they beat Bayern in the final the next season. His time was so successful that both Bayern and Dortmund were interested in taking him on by the end. He showed an ability to maneuver cannily in the transfer market on a limited budget. Key players like Vallejo and Mascaro were brought in for low fees, whilst he also excelled in the loan market. His team was also the perfect balance of youth and experience. He used an interesting system whilst at the club. He shifted the team to variations of a back three, usually a 3-4-2-1, 3-4-3 or a 3-5-2, but he could just as effectively use the 4-3-3 and 4-2-3-1, showing his adaptability and ability to coach tactical intelligence into his team. His Frankfurt team was a defense-first team, not having the ball for most of the match, with an average of 48% possession. But when off the ball, they played on the front foot, that is, a high-pressing, highly organized style of play. Sebastian Aller would often initiate the press by cutting off one half of the pitch and channeling the opposition into that direction, whilst Rebic supported this by a lateral press. The Frankfurt shape meant that naturally opponents would be predisposed to attacking the wings, but Chandler or Willems and Wolf worked in tandem with the rest of the back five. When the wing back on the ball side would advance to the ball, the rest of the five would shift across to cover the gaps, ensuring that there was never a wide overload. The midfield in this case would also be doing their best to cut off any passing lanes. This was an attempt to try force the opponent long, where their three centre-backs would usually win out. Abraham would also drop behind the other centre-backs ready to sweep up any flick-ons. If they won the ball high up or even deep, they were efficient in attack with quick passes into the midfield, which would allow them to funnel the ball out to less occupied spaces to allow chance creation. When attacking, Frankfurt were prepared to use long balls to the front two, who would look to find each other, or Boateng to begin the attack. Interestingly, Hasebe, who was usually a midfielder anyway, would push up into midfield when they had the ball, whilst the fullbacks acted as wingers. The front three showed great interchangeability as the midfield recycled the ball looking for the perfect chance to play the killer pass. So, could he bring those tactics to Bayern Munich? Let's take a general and brief look at what Heynckes had been doing. Bayern had been renewed since swapping Ancelotti's hands-off style of management for more direct coach and club legend Jupp Heynckes. Heynckes combined his high-speed attacking football with some elements of Pep's positional play from before Ancelotti. He switched them from the 4-3-3 to the 4-2-3-1, and firstly freed up James to roam more in his natural position. But Heynckes used the wings as well. Alaba and Kimmich were fullbacks, and Coman and Robben usually occupied the wings. What this meant is they always had a man in the half space and one in the wide space, as Coman and Ribéry are both comfortable wide or central, and so are the fullbacks. This would allow them to disposition the opponents. Defensively, they did not use a high press, instead using a mid-block. They would drop into a 4-2-3-1 or 4-1-4-1, and once the opponent reached the halfway line, they would struggle to find gaps in which to progress the ball. And here Bayern would begin a man-oriented press. The opponents' defense would be higher up the pitch, meaning that Coman and Robin could quickly leave their man press and take advantage of the gaps left behind. So, let's get into Kovac's first season. As previously discussed, one of Kovac's key competencies at Frankfurt was blending youth with experienced players, and Bayern had one of the oldest squads in the league, with most of the squad being aged over 28. One of his tasks would have been to begin the transition to a new era for Bayern by aging down the squad. And although their incomings did reflect this, many would have been underwhelmed. Gnabry and Sanchez came back from loan, and Leon Goretzka came in on a free. Alphonso Davies was the other incoming transfer. All were young players, but none of them were the superstar names that reflected a new beginning. At the same time, they got rid of Vidal and Costa, which did help to age down the squad. Let's look at the tactics. Many sectors expected Kovac to stick with his preferred back three, with Hummels and Boateng, whilst Martinez could play the hybrid role that Hasebe did. But instead, he switched to the 4-2-3-1 formation. One of the problems he encountered was that at Frankfurt, they were able to sit deep and play on the counter-attack primarily, whereas at Bayern, they had most of the ball and had to instigate most of the play, something that Kovac may have been unfamiliar with. Another problem was that he rarely used the same lineup, rotating heavily. This was not ideal for a team trying to adapt to the coach's new ideas. It also caused friction within the squad, as big-name players were not pleased when they were left out of the 11 one week after producing a stellar performance the week before. The most famous example of this was James Rodriguez, who spoke out against Kovac. Even club chairman Karl-Heinz Rummenigge was vocal about his dislike of Kovac's rotation policy. Tactically, Kovac didn't bring any massive changes. He often selected Niklas Süle ahead of Boateng, meaning that the majority of the build-up play came through Hummels, who often combined well with Alaba. Kovac was also flexible, allowing his midfielders to drop deep in order to create space behind the defense. Thiago would drop deep whilst the fullbacks moved high up the pitch. As the season went on and confidence grew in his style, James would often play and drop deep as well to draw even more midfielders forward. The wingers tended to drift centrally, and at the same time, Lewandowski was given the freedom to drop into midfield. If the opposition midfield had been drawn to James and Thiago, it meant that if the defenders followed Lewandowski, the wingers could take advantage of the space in behind, or if they stood off him, Lewandowski could function as a link player as he received time and space. Again, Kovac also used the wings extensively, using a similar pattern as before, with the relationships between the wingers and the fullbacks. As you can see, Kovac didn't make a massive overhaul in attacking tactics. Defensively is where his most visible impact came. He introduced the gegenpressing style, which he used at Frankfurt, using a man-oriented press to retrieve the ball high up the pitch as soon as they lost it. A quick turnover would allow them to take advantage of any gaps which would have emerged. But if the opponent had controlled possession, they shifted into a zone-oriented press, looking to cut off passing lanes so that they could cover more players without overcommitting in the press, as Kovac liked to keep numbers deep when defending. Like at Frankfurt, this would force the opponent long, and Hummels, Süle and Boateng are all great in the air. Again, as you can see, Kovac tried to bring at least some of his Frankfurt philosophy to the club. However, in some aspects he departed from his natural style, which may have cost them. Looking at the stats makes for interesting reading. For the most part, they were fairly similar to Heinkes' season, such as similar possession, shots for, and shots against. However, the expected metrics make for interesting reading. The prior season, Heinkes' side had overperformed expected goals and expected points, meaning that Bayern finished comfortably top. In contrast, Kovac's side underperformed their expected points, expected goals, and expected goals against, meaning they finished lower than predicted. Lewandowski in particular was well below par, which is unexpected and may have made Kovac's team look worse than in reality. But overall, Kovac's time could be considered successful domestically, winning the Bundesliga, Pokal, and the Super Cup. However, Europe is where Bayern have been looking to progress, and they went out limply at home to Liverpool in the round of 16, which would have been a disappointment. But how would you sum up Kovac's first season? Did you notice any other changes? Let me know in the comments below. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.